Hey guys, welcome back to Breaking the Barrier. I'm your host, Rebel Saklocha, and today I am joined by Tyler Schuster. She's a cattlewoman, a consultant, a fashion enthusiast, and the host of her own podcast, Basically Famous. Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and get to chat with you today.
I've followed along with you online for some time now. That sounds stalkerish, but in today's day and age, that seems to be how we connect. It's very evident that you are passionate about all you do. Tell us about your background and your foundation in agriculture.
Yes, well, I grew up on our family's ranch. So we lived in town until I was about 7, and then my mom was like, "I'm just so tired of making the drive to the ranch every day, then back to town and back." So we moved. We only live like 7 miles from town, so it wasn't drastic, but it still makes a big dent in your day when you're doing it multiple times a day. So we moved out to the ranch, and I knew nothing else. My brother and sister and I stock showed and rodeoed and worked on the ranch. And I always say my favorite mornings were with a Dr. Pepper and a Pop Tart in hand on the back of a horse. My mom didn't and doesn't really have full time help. So my siblings and I have always been her help. And so we spent a lot of our Christmas breaks, Thanksgiving breaks, summer breaks, working for her weekends. And I would say we still do that. My brother would probably agree. But I just loved agriculture, but I didn't know you could have a career in agriculture. So I thought I wanted to be a math teacher. And in 11th grade, my ag science teacher said, you could work in public policy or nonprofit in agriculture, and you could still support your family and what they do every day without being on the ranch. Because my mom had always talked about how hard it was and how little money she made as a rancher every day. So I was like, that sounds good. I'm going to go tour Tarleton State. So I toured Tarleton, loved it, and decided that's where I was going to go. I kind of always knew I wanted to go there, but that's where I decided I wanted to go. So while I was at Tarleton, I got a bachelor's of science in agricultural services and development. It's very similar to an ag leadership degree at most universities. And while I was there, I was like, I'm graduating in 3 years. I'm going to be 21. I don't think I'm just quite ready to be an adult. Let me get a master's. So then I went to Texas A&M and I got my master's in public service and administration. And during my first and second year there, I had to do an internship. And I interned for Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers, so TSCRA. If you're in the Texas area and you're ever driving around, there's these blue gates that say member, blue gate signs that say member. You would know. I worked for them as an intern and was like, I'm working this job in College Station and I'm not being used to my fullest potential. Hire me. I didn't really give them an option, and I stayed and I worked part-time for about 9 months remote while I finished my master's. And then they offered me a full-time position. And so I was there full-time for about 2 years. And this year I just made the move. I now work for Texas Tech University in development. I say I'm a friend raiser, not a fundraiser, but I support their College of Ag specifically. That's what I fundraise for. So I've just always really grown up in agriculture, but it wasn't until college that I was like, man, this is my calling. Like, God put a passion on my heart to be an advocate and talk to people and share my story. So I'm going to do it. Then in grad school, I was like, I can have a podcast. I can talk. Like, that's easy. What I learned, the videoing is so easy. It's all the other things you have to keep up with that are not easy. So I've had a podcast for almost 3 years called Basically Famous. I interview people basically famous to me, and it's been fun. It's been a great way to connect with people who I maybe never would have had the chance to. And on top of that, when I moved this year, I was like, I have a little more time in my life. Let me start consulting. So I also have a consulting business, and I consult 2 to 3 hours every night, it seems like. And I review resumes, I prep people for job interviews, or a lot of people just don't really know what they could do. And so we sit down and I talk about, here are career options, here are places to go look, and here are ways to start connecting with people who maybe have jobs you might be interested in. So I wear a lot of hats, literally and figuratively. But it's fun. Like you mentioned this week, like I'm home working on the ranch, working. My mom feeds about 400 people for Thanksgiving. So been working in the kitchen and every day is just an adventure and I love that. And that's the joy of my life and it keeps me young and fun.
Absolutely. Well, as a fellow ag kid myself, I feel like growing up there was a very limited view or scope for us when it came to exploring educational opportunities or career opportunities, not necessarily from an intentional standpoint, but just more by design. Talk about your time at Tarleton and in your master's program, and some opportunities specifically that you took advantage of that you are seeing the benefits from later in your career.
Well, there's one for sure that just really stands out. When I was in undergrad, I applied to be a beef advocate for American National Cattlewomen. And at that time, so my family ran primarily Angora goats until about 2014. And in 2014, I mean, you couldn't fight the predators and we couldn't find a shearing crew to come twice a year. Like that was so hard. And we decided to sell out and just move strictly into cattle. We had run some cattle on and off. So we got into the cattle business when I was in high school and I just wasn't really familiar with it. Like I knew I loved steak, but I was just kind of like, okay, cool. And my parents will tell you, like, coming back to the ranch was never something I thought I would do or say. And now that's a very real possibility in the future. But I saw a Facebook post to be a collegiate beef advocate with American National Cattlewomen, and I thought, I'll apply. And I think my parents thought I was joking, and I applied and I was accepted. And so I spent a year, and man, was it the most transformational year of my life. I spent a year with two others, a guy from the University of Florida and a girl, and I think she went to Cal Poly. And we traveled basically the US learning about beef and promoting beef. So it had been the first time I really saw beef production outside of Texas. You know, in high school, I went to feed yard camp. That's a thing in Texas. And learned about that because we don't feed cattle in the part of Texas I'm from. And but I just didn't really know, and I worked in the meat lab on campus for a couple months my freshman year, but, our first trip is Colorado. We go to CattleFax, we go to NCBA, we're in Greeley, we're touring JBS, and I am seeing beef production through and through. I mean, we literally went from processing facility we went from feed yard processing facility to restaurant, and the restaurant served the beef from the processing facility we had been at.
Wow.
And so, I see that. But not only am I seeing the industry, I'm going to DC and I'm lobbying with NCBA. I went to Cape Cod and spoke about beef at a road race. Then we got to go to NCBA convention both years, and then we had to do a project on a college campus. And so I did my project, even though I was at Tarleton with Texas A&M Cattlewomen on their campus. And so I was exposed to so much and so many great people. Some of my best connections today are still ladies I met in that program. And so that really gave me, I would say, the skill set to feel comfortable talking about the industry on the internet. I mean, that's really where it came from. And I always say, when you get to my social media platforms, like, I eat beef, I love agriculture, but I'm not this like hardcore pushing statistics. Like, I'm fun. I'm going to talk about all kinds of things on my socials. And if you have a question about agriculture, I hope you can come DM me and I'll answer, or I'm open to a conversation. And so that was like the biggest thing I did in undergrad that has impacted my career. Now, while at Tarleton, I also was the student body president, which was really fun. At the time, there was about 14,000 students, and I got to be the singular voice and sit on all kinds of committees and boards and select our current president. And I helped lead the university to become Division One. And so I tell people in that I really got the etiquette side of business and how you host a business meeting and how you email and how you sit at a nice dinner. Like I kind of had those skill sets before, but I was practicing them every day. And then I was getting opportunities other students weren't getting, and it was like, if I fail all 13,999 other students, and so that was really fun. Grad school was just different. It was 2020 to 2022, so, interesting times. But I got to sit on the Bryan College Station Chamber of Commerce board as an ex officio member for a year during grad school. And so I got to see pretty much how a board works and what was happening in town. Like I lived with my sister and I could go home and be like, okay, so this is what they're doing next month. We need to go. So I felt like I was in the know. But it was a really good way for me then to transition into a job where at cattle raisers, they have 135 active board of directors. That doesn't include honorary. So you're having to get together a huge group of people and communicate fast, efficiently, and effectively. Like you're having to get the point across. So those were all really good. But the beef advocate program with American National Cattlewomen was hands down, I mean, huge for my advocacy journey, my personal journey. I mean, I now can go out on this ranch and doctor anything or feed anything very comfortably. Before I would have had to ask my mom for like 1,700 directions, and I probably still will ask her 17 directions, but in a pinch, if my mom was gone, I could easily go out on the ranch and take care of it. I don't know if she thinks that, but I think I could.
Confidence is the biggest hurdle sometimes. So I think that's awesome. Well, it sounds like so much of what you have done and what you do is really relationship focused and relationship driven, especially in your role now as you're making friendships, as you said earlier. What does that look like in your day to day life, especially as you are visiting with supporters of Texas Tech and the like?
Yes, well, I'm a huge connector. Relationships are really important to me, and every day looks different, but I always tell people I'm active on social media. Like, you're going to know what I'm up to and what I look like because I am a poster and I post on all platforms, not all the same thing, but I post on every platform. So I'm connecting with people daily on each platform, whether they're seeing my content or I'm commenting on theirs. And then in the work front, like, I am a huge handwritten letter person still. And so I actually handwrite a birthday card to everybody in my portfolio. I write like thank you notes to anyone I go meet with or have lunch with. Um, I have some people in my portfolio that like don't have an email address. So I've like handwritten them like, here's a report on your endowment, here's what it's doing, so if you ever want to talk, here's my information. So I think the power of handwritten cards is still so important. So I have a big emphasis on that. And then, on the podcast, I try to write thank you notes to each guest. And in my personal life, I try to send happy notes, is what I call them, to my friends from time to time. And so I think there's just, that's still a huge way we connect in society is we love mail and the effort. It takes minimal time to shoot a text message. It takes time to sit down and write a letter. And so to do that is so important. But really on the online aspect is where I'm doing so much of my connecting from day to day, whether it's Texas Tech related, consulting related, or just for fun. 80% of my consulting clients I get off TikTok, which is insane. My
Wow.
parents think that's absolutely crazy, which I think it's crazy too. But TikTok is where I do the best, and I post weekly the jobs I've seen that week, and then at the end, it's like, "You can work with me, here's how."
Hmm.
And typically, those videos get anywhere from 5 to 20,000 views, which is insane.
Wow.
And so, I'm just connecting with people. I try really hard to comment back to people, to answer DMs. I answer my email pretty quickly. Like, I just try to be going. My parents probably say I'm always on my phone. Like last night, we were doing some stuff, and my mom was talking to me, and I was like, hang on, I have to post this Instagram story, then I can listen. But, like I've worked really hard to cultivate these online accounts where people feel comfortable talking to me and coming to me and connecting with me, that then they want to consult with me or they want to hop on and listen to my podcast. So that's really, I mean, my phone is such a powerful tool. Thanksgiving Day, I'll text probably 10 or 12 of my biggest donors, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. It'll take me 10, 20 minutes max, and to them it means so much. And then when I see them again, they're going to say, thank you so much for texting me. I really appreciate you took time out of your day. And it was, like I said, 10 or 20 minutes. So it's the little things that make a big difference when you're connecting with people. And you have to remember that.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting when we talk to our parents or people of their age demographic about what the workplace looks like today and networking. And a lot of those tips stand the test of time. A lot of those things are ageless, but there are some key differences when it comes to networking and building relationships in today's day and age. Talk about more about your consulting business and some of the services you offer through that.
Yeah, so I have always been a professional development guru, you could say. Like, I have loved conferences, meeting people. I joke I've never met a stranger. And if I go to an event, I'm like, "Ugh, I left with 100 new friends." And I have just loved people and I really love to pour into people. That's a huge, fills my cup. And I've been my parents gave me the ability to do a lot of really cool things growing up. And I had the opportunity to do all the FFA events and 4-H events and rodeo. And I always say my parents just treated me like an adult. Like, we would go somewhere and they would say, do you know them? And I would be like, no. And they're like, then introduce yourself. So I have no FOMO or fear of introducing myself to someone because when I was 7, my parents made me meet everybody at the feed store that day. And so then I got into college, was I would call it a massive platform when you are the student representing all the students. I just got to be around great leaders and people who, you know, talked about etiquette and interview skills and a resume. And then I just really didn't have time. And in January of this year, I met with my mentor and she was like, Tyler, you have so much wisdom and you're trying to say you don't because of your age, but you do. And she was like, you need to do something with it. Like, you need to share your gift with people that you can look at a resume and in 5 minutes, you can have it looking completely different. Or I can look at a job description and I can sit on a Zoom call with you and prep you for an interview. And she was like, you need to do something about it. Well, I was just busy. Then I moved to Lubbock and I then was not busy. Like, I told my mom, like, I have no social life here. And I'm like texting my sister every day because I'm like, okay, like, I'm not going out for drinks with the girls tonight. Like, what do I do? And I'm not one who can just, while I do love a good, like, sit on the couch, watch Hallmark or Netflix day, like, that's just not me. And so I was like, you know what? I already had a website. I was like, I'm just going to put a little consulting tab and tell people, like, "Oh, look at your resume." People will tell you my prices are way too cheap. I never want to price myself out of college students.
Mhm.
That's my heart is college students. So I started reviewing resumes is what I started with. And then I would review someone's resume and they would be like, "Well, could you hop on a Zoom call with me and just talk about, like, I'm getting an interview, but then I'm not getting a second interview. Or, I'm not acing the interview process." And I was like, oh, yeah. So I do really both of those. I've done a little bit of marketing consulting, but it's not really my thing. I'm more professional development. So I look at typically 8 to 10 resumes a week. I can't do more just time wise. And then I typically consult about 4 of those are a consulting call as well. And in that call, I'm going to talk through those changes I think you should make in your resume, but it's really your time to question me. So I have helped people build LinkedIn profiles. I have helped people prepare for an interview. I have one client who actually got the job and has started. She sent me the job description and I mock interviewed her. And then at the end, I said, here's questions you need to prepare for. Here are questions you can ask in the interview. And so just providing people the skill set of that, not everyone has parents or siblings who are in the workforce. My mom has worked on the ranch her whole life. My dad is the county judge. He is his own boss, essentially. When I was preparing for jobs, I could not call my parents and be like, okay, what do I do about this? I had to call my sister. And I was like, not everyone has a Shelby, that's my sister's name, that they can call or she can edit things. My sister edited thousands of essays and resumes and cover letters for me. But, and so that's what I offer for people. Like, I am a sounding board. I always tell people these are my suggestions. You can take them or leave them, but this is how I think you're going to make yourself a better candidate and more marketable in the job field and workforce. But a lot of people just come to me because they don't know what to do next.
Mhm.
I work with people either in college or who are ready for a career transition. And they're like, I do a ton with ag teachers. How do I say I'm an ag teacher and how do I apply that into just like the regular world?
Mm.
Like, if I went to work for John Deere, how do I speak about my experience in the classroom in a way that's going to resonate with them? And that's the hardest thing is people just don't know how to articulate their skill set in a way that's impressive to them. Because I tell
Mhm.
people who teach ag, I'm like, you manage probably 180 students. Let's just say that's kind of average. That's a skill. Like, people management is a skill. You
High
just have
school
to be,
kids are scary.
and they're mean. So you have to be able to articulate that skill set you have in a way that makes sense in corporate jargon, essentially. And I always tell people this sounds bad, but like you have to play the game. Like,
Mm.
corporate is a game and you have to learn how to play it and you have to speak the lingo. And so it's getting people used to that. I'm like, you have to say that you've done XYZ and this is how you say it in that way. So
Mhm.
that's really what it is. I just love helping people and I want to see people be successful in agriculture because if they succeed, we all succeed. And so most all of my clients too have not been ag related, but most all of them are seeking an ag career or have an ag background. And I'm also of the mindset, even if you're not going into agriculture, you can still be an advocate in your kindergarten classroom or at the hospital you work at. And so I'm not like, you only have to be an ag to be an advocate. That is not true. But that's just my specialty. So I help most of my clients are going into ag and Western realm or industry, but then, or they're not and they want to get into that.
So, as you're reviewing the resumes that are sent to you, what is the number one mistake people make when it comes to their resume?
I would say people say it's a resume, not a resume. The accents, the accents over the E's matter. So use them. Um, and that's like the number one mistake. Like, people are like, I sent you my resume. I'm like, it's your resume, not your resume. Let's start
That's
there.
hilarious.
And then I would say the second thing that's big for me, not when I'm consulting, because I tell people when I'm consulting, send it how you want. Like, if you want your feedback as a Word doc, send it as a Word, or if you want it in Google, send it as Google. But when you're sending your job application or your resume for a job, you have to send it as a PDF.
Hmm.
Because if it's Google, not everyone has access. Not everyone's a Google user. If you send it as a Word doc, they have to have Microsoft. Or, like, I have to hit enable editing to view it. What if I hit backspace over a letter in your name and then I think you can't spell? And so when you send things as a PDF, you have to work really hard to edit a PDF. But a PDF you can open on any device, phone, iPad, computer, and view it. And then you don't have to file, save as, blah, blah, blah when you go to exit out of it.
Mhm.
And so it's just convenient because people are going to spend 6 to 8 seconds on your resume. Sounds terrible. Like, you're probably going to spend 6 to 8 hours crafting this document, but it's quick. It's just a glance. And so if they have to spend part of that time opening your document, hitting enable editing, then viewing it, you're losing time, valuable time in front of somebody. So I always tell people send it as a PDF. It's a resume, and I would send it as Tyler Schuster resume. So like when I send documents, they're Tyler Schuster cover letter, Tyler Schuster resume. If you're applying for an internship and you just have to email in your application, I always suggest putting them in one document. So that way they just have to open one document to review all of your things. So in my last role, I reviewed over 100 resumes and applications for internships a year. And if you don't send all your documents in the same format, it's just chaos. And so I always suggest like send your cover letter, your resume, and your letters of recommendation in one PDF file, Tyler Schuster application, and it makes it easier for the person opening it because the more complicated it is to get into your documents and the more hassle, the less likely someone is going to want to work with you. Like I need simple, easy. I need you to show me you're capable, and I don't want to spend time fighting your documents.
Yeah. On that same vein, I feel like when it comes to interviewing for opportunities, specifically jobs, unless you have really sought out someone to help you with this skill, it's almost a trial by fire experience, which is a very helpless feeling as a young person and a young professional. What is the biggest mistake? I don't want to frame it as a mistake, but what is one thing you wish people would apply when it comes to interviewing for an opportunity, whether that be an in-person opportunity or virtual?
I think the number one thing is you need to prepare for the question, so tell me about yourself.
Mm,
Everyone's going to ask you that. That's the first question anyone asks on anything is, so tell me about yourself. Whether that's in networking, on an interview, or at the job. You know, you've gotten the job and you've started. You need to have about a 45-second, I wouldn't say memorize, but you need to know what your talking points are when you're going to tell someone about yourself because that's your time to shine. And it's a very limited window to tell people of things about yourself that maybe aren't on your resume. So, something I always say when people ask me, so tell me about yourself, well, I just say, well, I'm Tyler Schuster. I'm a multi generational rancher, and my background is a female owned and operated ranch in South Texas. And then I get into I went to Tarleton, I went to A&M, I now work at Texas Tech. While you can read that I went to Tarleton, I went to A&M, I work at Texas Tech on my resume, if I didn't tell you I was a multi-generational rancher and that my family's ranch is female owned and operated, you would never know. You know, and so that's something unique about me that you learn in that time, and it's something to remember me by. You know, people are always like, "Oh, your mom's the rancher, not your dad." And I'm like, "Yeah, like my dad's the judge, my mom's the rancher, you know, and so that's something people can remember me by. It's easy. I kind of have this like 30, 45-second tell me about yourself spill, and it leaves people thinking about, wow, she has a lot going on. She has a lot of hats she wears, but they remember like, oh, but she was professional and she was prepared and she spoke very well. And so have that. And then on the other side of that, in an interview, you always have to ask questions. They you are not just being interviewed by the company to see if you're a fit for them. You need to interview the company and see if they are a fit for you. This partnership has to work both ways to be successful. And so you need to prepare questions you can ask them. And so, you know, what does success look like in this position? What does the annual review process look like? Um, how can I be guaranteed to be included in projects?
mm,
Those are 3 questions you can ask in any job interview. You know, they're not specific. Now, you need to think about if you do have specific questions like, what does PTO look like? Or, you know, in the job description, you said I would be putting on this event. Can you tell me about what that would look like and how the planning process should go? But if you need just some general questions, those are a few I really like that I use personally. And when you have questions to ask, you look prepared.
mhm.
You've done your homework. You've shown up to the interview because you know that you're the person for this job, and asking these questions is icing on the cake. Like you are sealing the deal that you're invested, you want this job, and it's not just another like, oh, interview, check that off my list, move on. And so those are the two things like really in an interview that can set you up well in the beginning and set you up well in the end. What happens in the middle is up to how you respond to the questions they ask you. And unfortunately, I'm not a mind reader, and I'm not gonna be able to tell you that. I can prepare you, but I'm not gonna be able to tell you specifically. But those are 2 things you know you're gonna be guaranteed to be asked in an interview that you can prepare for.
I feel like specifically in agriculture, or maybe a step further, just young women in general, sometimes it's difficult to articulate that 45-second elevator pitch because it's been ingrained in our head that we need to appear humble or whatever that definition looks like in action, when in reality, we're missing out on so many opportunities simply because we either can't or don't articulate our backgrounds or our capabilities to someone. So I really love that piece of advice in general. Really powerful.
Well, I always tell people, if you don't toot your horn, who will?
I
I
love
mean,
it.
that's your chance to like toot your horn. Now, I always say I toot my horn and I toot it loud, but I have the work ethic to back it up. And if you're around me for any amount of time, you're gonna know like my best friend came over for the weekend and I was like, you're gonna get on this computer right here and I need you to work for me for an hour because I am behind. And I need you to create some graphics, and so like I'm a workhorse. I'm gonna prove that I can toot my horn because I can do the work to back it up. But
Hmm.
I'm like, toot toot, because no one else is gonna do it for you.
Yeah,
And so you have to learn, like you said, it's a balance of saying your accomplishments and what you can do and being humble. And it's a hard balance, but you're gonna figure it out. Like you might go in one time and like talk all about your accomplishments and been like a little too much. And the next time, so you brought it down and you're like, maybe not enough.
hmm,
And so it takes practice to find that balance of what's tooting my horn versus being humble and how do they meet in the middle. But you have to do it because no one else is going to do it for you. And in the workforce and in the job world, you are your biggest advocate. Like nobody can tell you things need to change until you come to terms with them yourself. Or you have to tell yourself when it's time to walk away or when it's time to start something. Like you are in charge of that. And so you have to know what you're worth, and tooting your horn allows you to do that.
most definitely. Well, we could go down the resume and interview rabbit hole for hours, but I want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about your podcast, Basically Famous. How did the podcast come to be, and what are some things you have learned throughout the past 3 years?
Yes. Well, when I was in grad school, I lived with my sister, and one night I was just like, let's start a podcast. And I basically gave us a 30-day period to launch it. I was like, if you will get someone to design a logo, I'll handle everything else. I'll figure out how to record, edit, upload, all things. And so I actually listened to a podcast on how to start a podcast. It was like 8 episodes, and I bought a microphone at Best Buy, and I literally have the video. I took a video at Best Buy, and I was like, I'm at Best Buy, I'm buying a microphone, I'm starting a podcast. And my friends and I laughed because one, I weighed 50 pounds more, my hair was way longer. And the fact that I just walked into Best Buy and recorded myself, like, it was no big deal. And so we started the podcast in 2022. My sister and I did it together for a year or maybe 3 seasons. And I joke we got divorced, but I moved out. And my sister got to keep the Roomba vacuum, and I got the podcast and the KitchenAid mixer. And so I just was telling my sister, like, Shelby, like, I'm finding the guests, I'm writing the questions, I'm doing the recording, the editing, the uploading, the marketing. What are you doing? You're not contributing to the team. Come on now. And she was like, Tyler, like, the podcast was your dream. And she was like, I did it because you asked and you lived with me, but that is not my dream. And take it. And I was probably a little more aggressive with the breakup than it needed to be. Like, I think one day I was just like, okay, I'm going to do this solo. But we've laughed about it now. And so I've been doing it by myself for either 3 or 4 seasons. I don't know. They kind of all blend together. Um, and since my sister has moved off it, it's really more focused on women in ag. My sister does work in agriculture, but she's really more passionate about other things. And so we were bringing in like one of her friends is an accountant and some of her friends own a business. And so we were bringing in these different aspects. And I was like, I'm wanting Jackie Crawford, Jenna Paulette. Like, this is the kind of people I want on the show. And so we weren't agreeing on who we wanted. And so she was really nice and let me really do whatever. So then I moved it to myself, and I feel like it's really grown in the last year. Since moving, I've had a lot more time to put into it. my last job was just really demanding of my evenings. And
Mhm.
so that's typically the time when you work for yourself, when you can get things done. And so I release a new episode every Tuesday. I take a break mid December to mid January, and then June and July, just because I get super burnout. Like, I'll be very honest with people. When you sit and record 16 episodes in a month and then you have to edit them and release them, it can be a lot, and it is a lot. And I'm not saying I don't enjoy it, because I do the work because I want to, but I have to have a little break. So I'm gearing down right now for season 6. The last 3 episodes, one came out this week and then the next 2 weeks, and today's is actually about resumes, and next week is how to prepare for a job interview. So, kinda similar topics. So y'all are getting nuggets of probably more in depth in those episodes. But I just love connecting with people, and my demographic is 18 to 30. Now I do have listeners outside that range, but that is my biggest demographic, girls 18 to 30. And I want to show them, like, here are all the career opportunities within agriculture. Like, you don't just have to be a farmer or a rancher. And we've been told that that's what we have to do, and so we can't do that because that's a guy's job.
Mhm.
And I'm here to tell you, one, it's not. If you want to do either of those things, go for it. My mom is living proof. My mom has been living and ranching by herself for 27 years. Um, but like, the ranch isn't sustainable for 3 other members of my family. And so I knew I was going to have to get a career, and I didn't know anything I do now existed. Like, I didn't know I could work in leadership development or development and be a fundraiser. I didn't know I could have a podcast and be a consultant, but also help on the ranch and have advocacy and be a content creator. And so I try to bring people to showcase, like, all of these different talents, jobs, and skill sets people have, because they need to be heard. And so I always tell people, you're never going to hear like Beyonce on my podcast. Okay. But everybody on my podcast is basically famous to me.
Mhm.
And so it is my friends, people I admire, people I've followed on social media, and I've never had the chance to interact with them. And the podcast was the perfect way for me to be like, hey, would you be on my podcast? And I joke, but truly, no one has ever told me no. Even people who are like, I hate public speaking. I'm like, it's very easy. I pre-write the questions, and if we don't like it by the end, we'll delete it and move on.
Mhm.
Like, it's totally up to you. And so it's just fun. It's been a great connecting tool too, as well. Like, people are like, oh, I listened to your podcast, or I meet someone and they're like, how can I learn more about you? And I'm like, oh, I have a podcast. You should tune in sometime every Tuesday called Basically Famous. And so it's a great way, and it's opened up doors for me as well. Like, I've gotten to be on other podcasts like yours. I've gotten to speak at events, to classes and to groups across the US, because I have this little podcast I started in 2022 in College Station, Texas.
Yeah, it's a really powerful tool for sure. And it opens up so many avenues and stories that you didn't even know existed. So definitely echo that sentiment as well. It's a pretty rewarding avenue for sure. Well, you obviously keep yourself very busy, but I'd love to know, what are Tyler's goals for the next 3 to 5 years? I know that's a loaded question, but I think there is value in articulating that to the world and manifesting it almost.
Yes. No, I'm big on, you need to set goals. So every year I set goals. I set a financial goal, a health goal, a podcast goal, and then usually like a fun goal or a personal goal. And sometimes there's more, but that's kind of my basis for how I goal set. So every year I set some goals. Like this year, one of my goals was to pay off my car. And I was trying to get it paid off early, so I got that done. And one of my goals was to get 1,000 followers on Basically Famous on Facebook and Instagram, and I got that done. My health goal was to work out 4 times a week, and I did not get that done. I do my best, but I'm just like, I had surgery and I couldn't work out for like a month, and then now I'm really slow to get back going again. But I think working out's really important. Um, and then, so I've been thinking about 2025 and putting some pieces together. And my hope, if I can sneak away for an hour on the ranch, I do my best thinking in the middle of nowhere with a notebook. So I want to finish my goals, but next year, like I have a dollar amount in savings I want to save. I would love to get the podcast sponsored again. I was able to get a sponsor this season, which was huge for me because I have self-funded the podcast up to this point, and so that sponsorship paid for really my subscriptions for a year. So I'd
Mhm.
love to do something like that again. In terms of like my personal social medias, I would really love to get 5,000 followers on Instagram and maybe 10 on TikTok. I don't know, TikTok's a little different. Um, and then I set a speaking goal. So I want to speak to 12 groups next year, so one a month, whether that's on Zoom or in person. And then I have dollar goals I have set for consulting and speaking that I hope to achieve next year. My hope with those is that with that money, I could maybe buy a house in 2026. We'll see. Um, I don't know if I'm ready to be a homeowner, but that's my thought process behind it right now is I could save that money and use it to buy a house. So those are some of my goals. Like long term, in 3 to 5 years, I actually really want to be working for myself, which is scary. But I'm very honest about it. I would love to like consult, keynote speak, and podcast for a living. And that would allow me the flexibility to live wherever.
Mhm.
So if I needed to be on the ranch for a week at a time, I could. If something super cool is happening in Fort Worth that I want to be at, I could be there. If something's happening, like there's an event in Kansas in February, I think I want to go to, I could be at that. Like I am so truthful in that I don't work well for someone very well. I have really high standards, and if people I'm working around don't meet them, then I get frustrated really easily. And so I know I need to work for myself in the long run.
Mhm.
Um, so in 3 to 5 years, I want to be able to do that. And so I'm hoping my consulting can take off enough that it can sustain that. But I'll be very real. Health insurance and benefits are a real thing, people. And until I either get married or I become a millionaire, I will be working for somebody who can provide. So that's a long term goal. I also um, really, there are some things I want to go see and do. One of them is Mount Rushmore, which people are
Mhm.
like, that's so basic. I'm like, but I've never been. Um, I, in 3 to 5 years, would love to be at the NFR working and doing brand collabs or, even being an onstage presence somewhere and hosting an event. So those are kind of things 3 to 5 years from now I want to be doing. Um, we'll see. I never thought I'd be in Lubbock, Texas, and here I am. So God has a funny way of changing our plans, but I fully believe I'm right where I need to be right now. So I am looking forward to what's to come, but 2025 is exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I feel like 2024 I really grew and hit my stride. I felt like, 2022, 2023, I figured out who I was as a person. Like in college, you're figuring that out. But once you become an adult, like you really get to pick and choose. You get to pick and
Mhm.
choose your friends if you want to hang out with your family. I feel like I got that in 2024. I feel like my career is thriving, my consulting's thriving, my podcast is thriving. Like I've hit the stride and career goals.
Mhm.
So I think if it all comes together in 2025, the world better watch out. I might be dangerous. But I love setting goals because I know you shouldn't put out into the world what you want to do, but I'm all about it. Like I want to write a book. When I'm gonna get that done, I don't know. But I want to write a book.
Mhm.
And so it's just like you're gonna hold me accountable to that.
Yeah.
And so I'm all about people say you shouldn't, manifest if you're a Christian, but I think you should. And I
Mhm.
think you should begin to speak things into existence. You should dream about them. And then if that's what God wants for you, like they're going to happen, you're going to have to work for them though.
Yeah.
And so if you have no vision of where you want to go, what are you running after? And goals allow you vision to figure out what you're running after and where you're headed. If I didn't have goals, I'd be running in circles.
Yep.
My goals keep me going in the right direction and they help me keep my priorities straight. If I'm like, this isn't going to help me reach my goals or become a better person, why am I doing this? And
Yeah.
so goals allow that as well.
Definitely. Well, that's one of my favorite parts of every podcast episode is closing things out articulating those goals to the internet or whoever may be listening. Interestingly enough, about a month or two ago, I was visiting with a guest and I asked her the very same question. And after the recording, she was a little nervous. She's like, man, that was a really big goal to just speak out there. And then sure enough, about a month later, she texted me and she was like, this happened. I'm so excited. So it's really cool to hear other people's goals and to watch that play out too. But I could pick your brain for hours. There are so many different rabbit holes we could go down. But is there anything else that we have missed that you'd like people to know?
No, but I will leave everyone with one thought. This is kind of my thing, and that is to choose joy. Happiness is a feeling, and feelings can be fleeting, but joy is a choice. And every day you get to choose whether you're joyful about the situation you're in. And I always tell people like I have thick thighs, and there are days I work cattle, and I'm so thankful I have thick thighs, you know? And so you got to find joy and happiness and thankfulness in everything you do. And so when you have that mindset, you know, you get to do these things. Is work always fun? No, but you get to go do it. And you get to provide for yourself or your family if you have a family. And so choose joy in whatever it is you do, and be joyful. And when you're a joyful person, it's contagious, and other people are going to be joyful people, and you're fun to be around. And I think fun to be around, you draw the right kind of people to your crowd, and you make the right pack and the right friend group. So that's kind of my words. Is I always tell people choose joy.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such an impactful conversation. Of course, I will link all of your socials in the show notes today for people to access if they want to connect with you or simply follow you on social media, but really appreciate your time this morning.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to join you, and it's always fun to be on the other side of the podcast microphone.
Awesome. Well, as a reminder, if you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to share with a friend as well as subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in case you missed it, all episodes of Breaking the Barrier are available to watch on YouTube as well. That'll do it for this week. I'll catch you next time.